The morning on Alara 7 was quiet. The kind of quiet that made a man forget there was a war somewhere out in the black sky above. Yoon Tae-ho stood on the porch of his farmhouse and watched the sunrise over the golden wheat fields. The air smelled like soil and something sweet, something carried by the wind from the wildflower meadow, behind the house where his daughter liked to play. Nari was already awake. She was always awake before him, always running somewhere with bare feet and dirt on her knees. She was 7 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, dark and round and full of light. Her mother had died 2 years ago from a sickness the colony doctors could not cure, and since then it had been just the two of them on this small piece of land at the edge of the settlement. Tae-ho had once been Admiral Yoon Tae-ho of the Terran Republic Fleet. He had commanded battleships. He had won engagements that were now taught in military academies. But 5 years ago he had looked at the Republic Senate and seen cowards shaking hands with the Valori Empire. And he had decided he was done. He took his daughter, flew to the farthest colony he could find, and buried his uniform in a box under the floorboards. Now he grew wheat. He fixed broken fences. He braided Nari's hair every morning, while she told him about the strange bugs she had found in the meadow. It was a small life, and he loved it more than anything he had ever commanded. "Appa," Nari called from the yard, holding up a flower with blue petals that shimmered in the light. "This one changes color when you breathe on it. Look." She blew gently on the petals, and they shifted from blue to soft purple. She laughed, and the sound filled the whole yard. Tae-ho smiled. "Bring it inside. We will press it in your book." She had a book full of pressed flowers. Every page was a different color, a different shape, a different world captured in something small and delicate. It was her treasure. At midday, the sky changed. Tae-ho was repairing a water pump near the barn when he felt it first. A deep vibration in the ground, the kind that came from something massive entering the atmosphere. He looked up and saw dark shapes breaking through the clouds. Not Republic ships. The silhouettes were wrong. They were too long, too sharp, too many. Valori. The colony sirens began to scream. Tae-ho dropped his tools and ran. He ran faster than he had run in years, faster than his aging knees should have allowed. He grabbed Nari from the meadow and lifted her onto his hip and sprinted toward the underground shelter behind the house. "Appa, what is happening?" she asked, her small hands gripping his shirt. "Hold on to me," he said. "Do not let go." The first plasma bolt hit the settlement center. The explosion was so bright that for a moment the whole sky turned white. The ground shook and Tae-ho stumbled but did not fall. He kept running. The shelter entrance was 200 meters ahead. He could see the metal door. He could see other colonists rushing toward it. The second bolt hit closer. The shock wave threw dirt and stone into the air. Tae-ho felt something sharp tear across his back, but he did not stop. He held Nari tighter and pushed forward. Then the third bolt struck. It landed 30 meters to their left. The blast wave hit them sideways, and Tae-ho was thrown to the ground. He curled his body around Nari, shielding her with everything he had. But the shrapnel was faster than love. A piece of burning metal, no larger than a man's finger, cut through the air and struck Nari in her side, just below his arms. She made a small sound, not a scream, just a soft, surprised breath, like she had been woken up from a dream. Tae-ho looked down and saw the blood. It was spreading fast across her blue dress, the one with the small white flowers she had picked out herself at the colony market. "Nari," he whispered. "Nari, stay with me." He pressed his hand against the wound and stood up. He carried her the last 100 meters to the shelter. People were shouting. Someone held the door open. Someone else reached for Nari. Tae-ho would not let her go. He carried her down the stairs and laid her on the floor under the emergency lights. The colony medic came. She looked at the wound, and her face told Tae-ho everything before her mouth did. "I am sorry," she said. Nari's eyes were still open. She looked up at her father, and her hand moved slowly to her pocket. She pulled out the blue flower, now crushed and stained with blood, and held it up to him. I kept it, she whispered, for the book. Then her hand fell, and the flower dropped to the floor, and the light in her dark round eyes went still. Above them the bombardment continued for another 40 minutes. When it stopped, 6,000 of the colony's 8,000 people were dead. The Valori ships left without a word, without a transmission, without even checking if anyone had survived. To them, this was not a battle. It was paperwork. Tejo carried his daughter's body out of the shelter and up into the ruined daylight. The wheat fields were burning. The farmhouse was gone. The meadow where she had picked her flowers was a blackened crater. He buried her there, at the edge of the crater, in soil that was still warm from the fire. He placed the crushed blue flower on the small mound of earth and stood there for a long time. The wind blew ash across the empty land. The sun set. The stars came out, cold and far away. And somewhere among them the ships that had killed his daughter were already moving on to their next mission, already forgetting the name of this world. Tejo stood there through the night. He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply stood, and something inside him, something that had been sleeping for 5 years, woke up. When dawn came, he walked to the ruins of the colony communication station. The main array was destroyed, but the backup transmitter in the basement still had power. He sat down, entered an encryption code he had memorized a long time ago, and sent a single message to 3 addresses scattered across Republic space. The message was short. They killed my daughter. I need a ship. Then he turned off the transmitter, walked back to the small grave in the burned meadow, and sat beside it to wait. Kong Mirai was sitting in the cockpit of the Black Lotus when the message came through. The ship was drifting near a trade station at the edge of Republic space, its cargo hold full of engine parts she had bought cheap and planned to sell expensive 2 systems over. It was not a proud life for a woman who had once captained a stealth frigate in the Republic Navy, but it was a free one, and Mirai valued freedom more than pride. She read the message twice. Then she sat very still for a full minute, her hands flat on the console, her dark eyes fixed on the words glowing on the screen. They killed my daughter. I need a ship. She did not ask questions. She did not reply. She turned the Black Lotus around and set a course for Alara 7. The cargo could rot. The buyers could wait. Tejo had saved her life once, years ago, when her ship was burning and the fleet had written her off. He had flown into a Valori kill zone alone to pull her out. She had told him then that she owed him a debt she could never repay. He had told her to forget about it. She had not forgotten. 12 hours later, and half a galaxy away, Baek Jisoo received the same message. She was inside a Valori client state, living under a false name, pretending to be a trade negotiator from a neutral species. She had spent 2 years building this cover identity, learning the local language, earning the trust of officials who had no idea that the quiet woman with the calm smile was a Republic intelligence operative mapping their military supply chains. She read the message once, then she stood up from her desk, walked to the small apartment she had been renting, and began packing. She destroyed every piece of her false identity in the bathroom sink. Documents, data chips, even the colored contact lenses that changed her eye color. 2 years of work turned to ash in 20 minutes. She was on a transport ship heading for Republic space before the local authorities even knew she was gone. The third message went to Shin Yuna, a Republic senator who sat on the Defense Committee. Yuna was not a soldier. She had never held a weapon. But she had spent 15 years fighting a different kind of war, the kind fought with budgets and votes and carefully placed words. She had watched the Senate bow to the Valori Empire again and again. trading human dignity for trade agreements, and it made her sick in a way she could not show in public. When she saw the news about Alara 7, the official Senate response was a formal letter of condemnation. Strongly worded, carefully worded, completely useless. Yuna sat in her office and read it 3 times, and each time her hands shook a little more. Then, Teiho's message arrived. She could not go to Alara 7. She could not hold a rifle or fly a ship. But she could open doors that no one else could open. That night, she moved a large amount of money from a disaster relief fund into an untraceable account. Weapons, fuel, stealth upgrades, medical supplies. Everything a small crew would need to do something impossible. She sent the account details to Teiho with no message attached. None was needed. Mireille arrived at Alara 7 first. She landed the Black Lotus on the scorched ground near what had once been the colony center, and walked through the ruins until she found Teiho sitting beside a small grave at the edge of a burned meadow. She stood next to him and looked at the mound of earth with the crushed blue flower on top. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say anything. She just sat down beside him and waited. Jisoo arrived the next day. She walked across the ash fields with a bag over her shoulder, and her face showing nothing at all. She saw the grave. Then she opened them and looked at Teiho and said, "Tell me who gave the order." "An overlord named Drenak," Teiho said, "commander of the Vylori 9th Expansion Fleet. His flagship is called the Throne of Silences." Jisoo nodded slowly. "I know that ship. I have intelligence on it. Patrol schedules, crew rotations, maintenance cycles." She paused. "There is a window. Every Imperial rotation, the flagship's shields go partially offline for 6 hours during a core systems reset. It has been this way for years. They have never needed to worry about it because no one has ever been foolish enough to attack a Vylori flagship." "Good," Teiho said. "Then they will not be expecting us." On the 3rd day, someone else arrived. A young man, barely 22 years old, thin and nervous, but with steady hands and sharp eyes. His name was Han Doha, and he had come alone in a repair shuttle that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. "I heard about what happened here," he said, standing at the edge of their small camp. "The same thing happened to my family on a border world called Kevin 3, 2 years ago. Vylori Patrol Fleet classified it as a training exercise." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I'm a combat engineer. I can fix anything, build anything, and I can make explosives out of kitchen supplies. I want to help." Teiho looked at him for a long time. The boy was young, too young to throw himself into something like this. Mireille spoke first. "I have seen his name in veteran networks. He is good. Better than good." Teiho looked at Doha again. He saw the same thing in the young man's eyes that he saw in his own mirror every morning. A wound that would not close until someone answered for it. "Welcome aboard," Teiho said. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked. Mireille and Doha rebuilt the Black Lotus from the inside out. They installed the stealth systems Yuna had funded, upgraded the weapons, reinforced the hull. Doha designed a sensor ghost, a device that could project a false signature to fool Vylori scanners. It was brilliant work, the kind that should have been done by a team of 50 in a military shipyard, not by a young man working alone in a burned field with borrowed tools. Jisoo spread her intelligence across the floor of their makeshift command center. Maps of Vylori space, fleet movements, communication relays, the exact schedule of the Throne of Silences. She had spent years collecting this information, piece by piece, never knowing what it would be used for. Now she knew. Teiho stood before them on the last night before departure. The Black Lotus hummed behind him, freshly armed and painted dark as the void. "I want to be clear," he said. "I am not starting a war. I am not asking for revenge on the Vylori Empire. I want one man, the man who gave the order to kill my daughter and 6,000 people, and then forgot about it before dinner. I want him to know why he is dying. He paused. If anyone wants to walk away, now is the time. No one moved. Mirai powered up the engines. Jisoo locked in the navigation route. Doha ran a final check on every system he had built. And Taeho sat in the co-pilot seat and looked out at the stars, and for the first time since Nari died, he felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. The Black Lotus lifted off the burned soil of Alara 7 and vanished into the dark. In the Grand Council Chamber of the Valori homeworld, a room built from black stone and lit by floating orbs of pale blue light, Archon Selith sat on a throne that was older than most civilizations. He was tall, even for a Valori. His 6 eyes, arranged in 3 pairs across his narrow face, blinked slowly as he listened to the daily reports from his military commanders. His skin was the color of old bone, and his voice, when he spoke, was soft and precise, like a knife being drawn slowly from its sheath. Item 14, said the aide standing below the throne. The pacification of Sector 77G, Subsector Ilara. Overlord Drenak reports full completion. Human colony neutralized. Minimal resource expenditure. Selith waved one of his 4 long fingers. Casualties? Approximately 6,000 of the native inhabitants eliminated. 2,000 survivors. Standard dispersal expected. And the human government's response? A diplomatic letter expressing strong disapproval. A low sound moved through the chamber. It took a moment to recognize it as laughter. A dozen Valori officials, seated on curved benches around the room, found this amusing. A letter. The humans had responded to the destruction of their people with a letter. Next item, Selith said, and Alara 7 was forgotten before the aide finished turning the page. 3 systems away, aboard the Throne of Silences, Overlord Drenak was having his evening meal. The flagship was enormous, a vessel nearly 4 kilometers long, with a crew of 12,000, and enough firepower to burn a continent. Drenak sat at the head of a long table in his private dining chamber, eating something that had once been alive on a world his fleet had conquered 2 cycles ago. He did not know what it was called. He did not care. An aide approached and informed him that he had been praised by the Archon's Council for the Alara operation. Which operation was that? Drenak asked. The human colony, Overlord, Sector 77G. Ah. Drenak chewed slowly. How many livestock units was that worth? Overlord? The humans. How many livestock units is that in equivalent economic value? I want it logged for my quarterly efficiency report. The aide hesitated, then bowed and left to calculate the number. Drenak returned to his meal and did not think about it again. This was the Valori Empire. 10,000 years old, 200 conquered species, a territory spanning a quarter of the galaxy. They had built their civilization on one simple belief, that they were the highest form of life, and everything else existed only to serve them or die. It was not cruelty in the way humans understood cruelty. It was something worse. The Valori did not hate the species they destroyed. They simply did not think about them at all. And that was why they would never see what was coming. The Black Lotus crossed into Valori space on the 8th day of its journey. Mirai flew the ship through a gap in the border patrol network that Jisoo had identified from her years of intelligence work. The gap was narrow, less than 40 minutes of clear space between 2 overlapping sensor sweeps. But Mirai threaded the needle with the calm precision of someone who had been doing impossible things her whole career. Inside the ship, the crew settled into a rhythm. Mirai flew. Jisoo monitored communications. Doha maintained systems and tinkered with his devices. And Taeho sat in the observation room at the back of the ship and watched Valori's space pass by through the reinforced window. It was a terrible beauty. Vast shipyards orbiting dead planets. Factory worlds where the skies were black with smoke and the surface glowed orange from the forges below. Orbital stations shaped like rings, each one housing millions of enslaved workers from species that had been conquered so long ago they no longer remembered their own names. Trade routes guarded by warships the size of small moons. And everywhere, the Velori symbol, a circle with 6 lines radiating outward, representing the 6 eyes of their species. It was carved into stations, painted on ships, and branded on the skin of slaves. It meant ownership, it meant silence, it meant that everything within sight belonged to the Empire, and the Empire answered to no one. This is what Nari would have grown up to face, Tejo said, quietly, one night, standing in the observation room with Mirai. She stood beside him, watching a Velori slave transport crawl across the void. She would have faced it with flowers in her hands, Mirai said, and she would have been braver than all of us. Tejo said nothing, but his hand tightened on the railing. On the 12th day, Jisoo called everyone to the small briefing room. She had intercepted a transmission from the Throne of Silences through a Velori comm relay she had quietly hacked 3 days earlier. The transmission confirmed everything. The maintenance cycle was scheduled in 4 days, 6 hours of reduced shields. The flagship would be stationed near a dead moon, designated Velori Outpost 4419, a quiet sector with minimal support ships. "This is our window," she said. "We park the Black Lotus in the shadow of the moon, wait for the shields to drop, and move in." Getting in is one thing, Doha said. He had pulled up the flagship's technical schematics on a display screen. "This ship has 12,000 crew members and internal security systems on every deck. We cannot fight our way through. We do not need to fight everyone. Only the ones between us and the command deck. I have mapped the internal layout. There is a waste exhaust port on the lower hull that connects to a maintenance corridor. It is not guarded because no one would be insane enough to use it as an entry point. The corridor leads to a service elevator that reaches the upper decks. From there, it is 900 meters to the command chamber. 900 meters through the most heavily armed flagship in the Velori Navy, Mirai said. "Yes," Jisoo replied, without expression. Doha looked at Tejo. "What about extraction? Even if we get in and get to Drenak, how do we get out?" "That is my problem," Mirai said. "I will hold the Black Lotus outside the flagship and come to you when you signal. You worry about the mission. I will worry about bringing you home." Tejo looked at each of them. Mirai, who had left everything to answer his call. Jisoo, who had burned a career's worth of intelligence work without a second thought. Doha, who was barely old enough to drink, but had more courage than men twice his age. They were here because of him. Because of a message sent from a burned field beside a child's grave. "There is one more thing," Tejo said. He looked at Doha. "The virus you built for the communication systems. I want it modified. I do not just want it to disable their comms. I want it to broadcast. Everything that happens on that command deck. I want every Velori ship, every Velori world, every enslaved species in this empire to see it. Live. No delay. No filter." Doha blinked. "You want them to watch?" "I want them to know," Tejo said, "that someone came for the man who killed a child. And I want every slave, every conquered people in this empire, to see that the Velori can bleed." Then, Doha nodded slowly and went to work. That night, Tejo sat alone in his small cabin. He took out the hologram projector he carried in his pocket and activated it. A small figure appeared above his palm. Nari, laughing, spinning in a field of blue flowers, her hair flying behind her, her eyes bright. He watched the hologram loop 3 times. Then he whispered, "I am sorry, little one, not for what I am going to do, but that you were born into a galaxy where this was needed." He closed the projector and lay down in the dark. Outside the ship, the dead moon of Outpost 4419 grew larger in the viewport. And somewhere beyond it, the throne of silences waited. 4 days, 6 hours, 1 chance. Teho closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he slept. The maintenance cycle began at the 3rd hour of the Veilori Imperial Clock. Across the hull of the Throne of Silences, sections of the shield grid flickered and went dark in a slow rolling wave, like lights being turned off, one room at a time. It was routine. It had happened 1,000 times before. No one on the flagship thought twice about it, because in 10,000 years of empire, no one had ever been mad enough to attack a Veilori flagship during a maintenance window. Tonight would be different. Mirai watched the shield readings from the cockpit of the Black Lotus, which was sitting perfectly still in the shadow of the dead moon, engines cold, running on minimal power. The ship was invisible. Doha's sensor ghost was projecting the electromagnetic signature of a small asteroid, and the Veilori long-range scanners passed over them without a flicker. Shields at 40% and dropping, Mirai said. Window is opening. Teho stood behind her, already wearing his combat suit. It was old Republic military issue, gray and battered, the kind of suit that had seen too many fights and kept coming back. Jisoo was beside him, dressed in black, with a slim blade on her hip and a silenced pulse pistol in a shoulder holster. Doha was checking his pack one last time, his fingers moving fast over the tools and explosives inside, counting everything by touch. Shields at 20%, Mirai said. Go in 90 seconds. Teho looked at his team. Stay close, stay quiet. We get to the command deck, we do what we came to do, and we get out. No heroics, no detours. Doha almost smiled. We are flying into the biggest warship in the galaxy to kill its commander with 4 people. I think we passed heroics about 3 star systems ago. Nobody laughed, but something loosened in the air. A small, human moment in the middle of something enormous. Shields at 12%, Mirai said. Go. She pushed the Black Lotus forward on a silent burn, crossing the 40,000 kilometers of open space between the moon and the flagship in just under 11 minutes. The ship moved like a dark whisper through the void. Mirai's hands were steady on the controls, her eyes reading a dozen instruments at once. She brought the Black Lotus underneath the flagship's belly, close enough to see the individual hull plates, and stopped beside the waste exhaust port that Jisoo had identified. You have 5 hours and 40 minutes, Mirai said as the boarding hatch opened. I will be here. If I have to move, I will find you. Just signal. Teho touched her shoulder as he passed. No words were needed. They went in. The exhaust port was tight and hot and smelled like burned chemicals. Doha went first, cutting through the internal grate with a plasma tool, then pulling himself into the maintenance corridor beyond. Jisoo followed, then Teho. They moved fast and low, following the route Jisoo had memorized from the stolen schematics. The maintenance corridor led them up through the lower decks. They passed through sections of the ship that were dimly lit and empty, areas where only machines operated during the maintenance cycle. The air hummed with the deep vibration of the flagship's core systems cycling through their reset sequence. At the 4th deck junction, Doha stopped. He pulled a small device from his pack and connected it to a wall panel. This is the secondary communication array, he whispered. Uploading the broadcast virus now. It took 90 seconds. When it was done, Doha nodded. It is active. Everything that happens on the command deck from now on will be recorded and transmitted live on every Veilori military and civilian channel in real time. They will not even know it is happening until it is too late. They moved on. The first Veilori soldiers appeared on Deck 7, a patrol of 3, tall and armored, carrying long plasma rifles. Jisoo saw them first. She signaled for Teho and Doha to stop. then moved forward alone, silent as a shadow. She was behind the first soldier before he knew she was there. Her blade found the gap in his armor at the neck. The second soldier turned, and she was already on him, one hand redirecting his rifle, the other driving the blade upward. The third raised his weapon, but Taeho was there, stepping out of the dark, his hand closing over the rifle barrel and pushing it aside. One shot from his own pistol, close and precise, and the corridor was silent again. They dragged the bodies into a storage room and kept moving. Deck 9 was harder. A security checkpoint with 6 guards and a reinforced door. Doha studied it for 30 seconds, then pulled 2 small charges from his pack and attached them to the ceiling above the checkpoint. He set a timer, and they moved back around the corner. The charges detonated with a sharp crack. Not loud enough to alert the entire ship, but enough to blow out the ceiling panels and drop debris on the guards below. In the confusion, Jisoo and Taeho moved in. It was fast and brutal. Taeho fought with a silence that was more frightening than any battle cry. He moved through the Valori soldiers with the mechanical precision of a man who had spent 30 years learning how to end fights quickly. There was no anger in his movements, no rage, just a cold, absolute efficiency that made even Jisoo glance at him twice. Doha took a hit on his left arm. A plasma graze that burned through his suit and seared the skin beneath. He gritted his teeth, wrapped it with a quick patch from his medkit, and kept moving without a word. Deck 12, Deck 14. The command deck was on Deck 16. At Deck 15, they ran into the elite guard. Drennick's personal soldiers, bigger and faster than the regular Valori troops, wearing heavy armor with energy shields built into the chest plates. There were 8 of them, standing in a wide corridor that led to the final stairway. Doha looked at the energy shields and then at his pack. He had one device left, something he had built specifically for this moment. It was ugly and improvised, a tangle of wires around a magnetic core the size of a fist. He called it a pulse hammer. It would generate a localized electromagnetic burst strong enough to short out every energy shield within 20 meters. The problem was that it would also short out their own weapons for about 10 seconds. 10 seconds with no guns against 8 Valori elite guards, Doha said quietly. That is not great odds. Taeho looked at Jisoo. She pulled her blade from its sheath. Taeho reached down to his boot and drew a combat knife he had carried since his Navy days. We have had worse, Jisoo said. It was not true. They had never had worse, but it sounded right. Doha triggered the pulse hammer. The corridor flashed white. Every energy shield on the Valori guards died at once. Their armor went dark. In the same instant, every electronic weapon in the corridor became useless. And then, for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years, it was blade against blade, muscle against muscle, human will against Valori strength. He was not fast, but he was something the Valori had never encountered. A man who was not fighting to survive, but fighting because he had already lost the only thing that mattered, and death held no power over him. He took hits, he bled, but he did not stop moving, and every time his knife found its mark, another guard fell. Jisoo was a ghost. She moved between the guards like water between stones, finding gaps in their armor that they did not know existed. 2 fell to her blade in the first 3 seconds. When the 10 seconds ended and their weapons came back online, only 2 guards remained. Doha dropped them both with clean shots before they could reactivate their shields. The corridor was quiet. Taeho was bleeding from a cut above his eye and a deep gash on his forearm. Jisoo had a bruise spreading across her jaw. Doha's injured arm was shaking, but the door to the command deck was in front of them. Taeho wiped the blood from his eyes and pushed it open. The command deck of the Throne of Silences was a vast circular room with a high ceiling and windows that looked out into the stars. In the center stood Overlord Drenak, 6 eyes wide with confusion, surrounded by a dozen officers who were scrambling to understand why their security feeds showed dead soldiers in the corridors. No alarms had sounded. The broadcast virus had suppressed them. Drenak looked at the 3 humans standing in the doorway of his command deck, bleeding and battered and holding weapons. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never felt before. He did not have a word for it. The Valori language did not have a word for it. The word was fear. "What is this?" Drenak demanded. "Who are you?" The officers reached for their sidearms. Jisoo was faster. She put them down in a blur of precise shots that echoed through the chamber. In seconds, only Drenak was standing. He looked at Taeho. His 6 eyes blinked rapidly. "What world are you from?" Drenak asked. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. Taeho stepped forward. In his left hand he held his knife. In his right he held something small, a single pressed wildflower, blue petals stained with old blood. "Alara," Taeho said. Drenak searched his memory. The name meant nothing to him. It was not there. It had never been important enough to remember. "I do not know that place," Drenak said. "I know," Taeho replied. "That is why I am here." He moved forward, and the overlord of the Valori 9th Expansion Fleet, commander of 12,000 soldiers and a ship that could burn worlds, died in the silence of his own command deck, killed by a farmer who had once been an admiral, who had lost the only thing in the galaxy worth more than revenge. Taeho placed the wildflower on Drenak's chest. Across every screen, every channel, every military vessel, and every slave world in the Valori Empire, the broadcast played. They watched. They all watched. The great and terrible Valori watched a single human crew walk into the heart of their power and take what they came for. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Empire was silent. The alarms finally came. Not from the command deck, where Doha's virus still held the internal systems in a chokehold, but from the escort ships surrounding the Throne of Silences. Someone on a nearby destroyer had seen the broadcast and raised the alert. Within minutes, every Valori warship in the sector was turning toward the flagship. Weapons hot, scanners sweeping. "Time to leave," Jisoo said. They ran. Back through the corridors, back past the bodies of the guards, back down through the maintenance shafts. Doha was slowing. His wounded arm had gone numb, and his face was pale, but he kept his feet moving, kept his good hand gripping the walls as they climbed down through the guts of the massive ship. Taeho grabbed him twice when he stumbled. Jisoo cleared the path ahead, checking corners, listening for boots on metal. Taeho hit the comm on his wrist. "Mirai, we're coming out." Her voice came back instantly, calm and sharp. "I also see 9 destroyers converging on your position. You have about 4 minutes before they close the net. Then I suggest you start the engines." They have been running for the last 20 minutes. I was getting bored. They reached the exhaust port and dropped through it into the Black Lotus. The boarding hatch sealed behind them, and Mirai did not wait for them to strap in. She hit the engines at full burn, and the ship launched away from the underbelly of the flagship like a stone from a sling. The first plasma volley from the destroyers missed by less than 100 meters. The Black Lotus shook from the shockwave, but held together. Mirai threw the ship into a rolling dive, cutting beneath the firing arcs of 2 warships, and threading a gap between their hulls that should not have been wide enough. Doha's sensor ghost activated automatically, projecting false signatures in 3 directions. For a few critical seconds, the Valori gunners did not know which target was real. Mirai used those seconds like a surgeon uses a scalpel. She pushed the Black Lotus through the chaos of the scrambling fleet, dodging fire, riding shockwaves, making the ship dance in ways that its designers never intended. In the co-pilot seat, Teho watched the Valori ships fill the viewport, their massive forms spinning past like cliffs in a canyon, and for a moment, he understood why Mireille had never been able to give up flying. FTL in 30 seconds, Mireille said through her teeth, her hands a blur on the controls. If anyone is religious, now would be a good time. A plasma bolt grazed the port side, and alarms screamed through the cockpit. Doha, slumped against the engineering console with one hand, rerouted power from the damaged section before the fire could spread. 20 seconds. Another hit. The lights flickered. Something in the engine room made a sound that engines should not make. 10 seconds. Mireille pulled the Black Lotus into a tight spiral around the dead moon, using its gravity to slingshot toward open space. The Valori destroyers tried to follow, but they were too big, too slow, too used to chasing enemies who ran in straight lines. Now, Mireille whispered, and she pulled the FTL lever. The stars stretched into white lines, and the Black Lotus vanished. They made 2 more FTL jumps before they were clear of Valori space. The second jump nearly tore the ship apart. Doha held the engines together with emergency patches and what he later described as pure stubbornness. When they finally dropped out of FTL in neutral space, the Black Lotus was trailing smoke from 3 hull breaches, and the port engine was making a sound like a dying animal. But they were alive. Doha collapsed onto the floor of the engine room and did not move for 6 hours. Jisoo sat in the briefing room and cleaned her blade with steady hands and a face that showed nothing. Mireille stayed in the cockpit, running diagnostics, patching systems, talking to the ship in a low voice, as if comforting a wounded friend. Teho stood alone in the observation room and watched the stars. And for the first time since Nari died, the weight on his chest was a little lighter. Not gone. It would never be gone. But lighter. Behind them, the galaxy was changing. The broadcast had gone everywhere. Doha's virus had done its job too well. Every Valori military channel, every civilian network, every communication system on every conquered world had carried the footage. A single human crew breaching the most powerful flagship in the Empire. 3 people fighting through elite guards with blades and courage. A human farmer standing over the body of an overlord, placing a flower on his chest, while the overlord's own officers lay dead around him. And the part that burned deepest into the memory of every being who watched it was the moment when Drenak asked where Teho was from, and Teho said a name, and the overlord did not recognize it. He had killed 6,000 people on that world, and he did not even remember its name. That image traveled faster than light itself. It reached slave worlds where species had been in chains for centuries. It reached mining colonies where workers had forgotten that rebellion was a word. It reached the dark hidden corners of the galaxy where conquered people whispered to each other in the night, keeping alive the memory of what freedom felt like. And something happened. On a factory world called Valori Station 12, a group of enslaved workers from a species called the Renai stopped working. They simply put down their tools and stood still. When the Valori overseers ordered them to resume, they did not move. There were 40,000 of them, and they stood in silence, and the overseers did not know what to do because this had never happened before. On a mining colony in the outer territories, slaves from 3 different species overwhelmed their guards in the night, took control of the communication arrays, and broadcast a message that said only, "We saw what the humans did, we remember our names." Within weeks, revolts broke out on 14 Valori client worlds. Small uprisings at first, easily contained, but they kept coming. Every time the Valori crushed one, 2 more appeared. The Empire had to pull entire fleets from the frontier to suppress the rebellions, stretching their forces thin for the first time in living memory. Archon Selith was furious. He convened an emergency council and demanded an explanation. His admirals told him what he did not want to hear. The uprisings were not coordinated, they were not organized. They were simply the result of a single idea taking root in the minds of billions of enslaved beings across the galaxy. The idea that the Valori were not untouchable. This was one ship, Seleth said, his 6 eyes blazing. One human ship with 4 people. How is this possible? None of his advisors had an answer. They had spent 10,000 years studying tactics, logistics, fleet movements, and planetary conquest. They had never studied grief. They had never studied love. They did not understand that a father's rage was not a military problem. It was a force of nature, and you cannot build a shield against the weather. In the Republic, Senator Shin Yuna moved with precision. She leaked intelligence showing the Valori Empire's internal instability. She gave speeches about human strength and human dignity. She used the footage of Teho on the command deck, standing over the body of an overlord with a flower in his hand, and she showed it to every senator, every committee chair, every military leader who had ever argued for appeasement. The appeasement faction collapsed in 3 weeks. For the first time in a generation, the Republic Senate voted unanimously to begin a full military buildup. New ships were commissioned. Old alliances were renewed. The message was clear. Humanity would no longer bow. Teho did not stay for any of it. He flew back to Alara 7 on the battered Black Lotus and landed on the same scorched ground where his journey had begun. The colony was being rebuilt. New buildings were rising from the ashes. New settlers were arriving every week. Many of them veterans, people who had heard what Teho had done and wanted to live on the world he had fought for. He walked past the construction, past the new homes and the fresh foundations, past the people who stopped and stared and whispered his name, and he went to the meadow at the edge of the settlement. Nari's grave was still there, the small mound of earth, the simple marker he had carved from a piece of stone. But something had changed. Around the grave, pushing up through the scorched and blackened soil, tiny green shoots had appeared. And at the tips of those shoots, small blue flowers were beginning to bloom. The same flowers Nari had loved, the same flowers that changed color when you breathed on them. Life was coming back. Teho sat down beside the grave. He sat there for a long time, watching the flowers sway in the wind, watching the sky turn gold and then dark, watching the stars come out one by one. Behind him, at the edge of the meadow, 4 figures stood in silence. Mireille, arms crossed, eyes soft. Jisoo, still and watchful, the ghost of a smile on her face. Doha, his arm in a proper medical sling now, standing straight despite his wounds. And a little farther back, more figures, settlers, veterans, families with children, people who had come to this burned world because a man had refused to let his daughter's death be a footnote. No one approached, no one spoke. They simply stood, and they waited, and they let him have this moment. Teho reached out and touched one of the blue flowers with his fingertip. It shifted from blue to soft purple under his touch, just like it had in Nari's hands. He closed his eyes. They ruled 1,000 worlds and thought a child's life was nothing. They counted her death as a number on a report, a footnote in an efficiency review, a detail too small to remember. They did not understand that a single life could be worth more than an empire. A galaxy of enslaved beings had looked up from their chains and remembered that they were more than property. Because one little girl had loved wildflowers, and her father had loved her enough to walk into the heart of darkness and make the darkness remember her name. Teho opened his eyes, the flowers swayed, the stars burned. And somewhere on worlds the Valori had thought they owned forever, people were standing up.